Well, good morning and welcome. This is Breakfast Extra, but we're going to start on a very somber note today. Now, the past 1 week saw us wincing at a certain viral video. It was very hard to watch, but it needed to be seen. It was a young man. He was weak, he was injured, and he was surrounded by men who tortured him. His voice was trembling as he spoke to the camera. He was begging for help from whoever was watching at that time, and at the same time, he was also begging for help from his captors, or rather begging for mercy from his captors. Now, he was a core member of the National Youth Service Corps, a young Nigerian graduate answering the call to serve his country. But somewhere along the road between where he studied and where he was meant to serve, the country failed him. Now, to understand the weight of that failure, you have to understand what the NYSC was meant to be. And I'll tell you. The program was created in 1973 by the government of Yakubu Gowon, just 3 years after the Nigerian Civil War. Nigeria was bruised, distrust ran deep, and the idea was simple and it was hopeful as well. Send young Nigerians across the country, making neighbors out of strangers. The thinking at the time was that if young Nigerians lived together, worked together, and maybe even ate together, they might begin to understand each other. And slowly, maybe then, a nation would knit itself back together after the war. It was a beautiful idea, where at the end of which a certificate that said you had given something back to the country that raised you was awarded to you. And for decades, it became a rite of passage for Nigerian graduates. But every nation eventually has to answer one uncomfortable question. Is that system still working? Because the country of 1973 is not the country of today. In 1973, the fear was tribal division. Today, the fear is whether you will even arrive at your posting alive. Banditry, kidnapping, armed groups controlling highways, regions where even security agencies themselves tread carefully. Yet, the machinery of the NYSC continues to operate like as if it was still 1973. Young graduates are still sent across the long distances to their posting areas, still to navigate not just ordinary roads, but now dangerous highways, find their way to unfamiliar places with little more than just a call-up letter and optimism. And when things go wrong, the response often feels painfully familiar from the Nigerian authorities. Families negotiating with kidnappers, communities raising ransoms, a nation watching helplessly on social media. Which brings us back to that video. Because once the kidnapping became public on social media, Nigerians expected something. It was very simple. It ought to have happened. They needed evidence that the system designed to protect corps members had switched on. The first expectation was attention, immediate, visible attention. A young man in national service was captured. The video, while it was circulating across the country, something ought to have been done. In situations like this, institutions usually step forward quickly to signal that matters are being handled at the highest level. That urgency last week was difficult to see. In fact, it was absolutely missing. The second expectation was coordination. The NYSC does not run security operations, this we know, but it sits at the center of a network that should activate when a corps member is in danger. The police, the Department of State Service, the military in regions where banditry is active ought to have stepped in, but nothing happened. What people hoped to see was a rescue process, intelligence gathering, negotiation, if any, handled by professionals, a system moving deliberately to recover one of its own. Instead, the burden appeared to fall largely on the family, of which 10 million naira was eventually raised and reportedly paid to the bandits, and still no rescue, no action by the NYSC. At this point, the uneasy question and a loud one is, where is the effort by the NYSC? Because when the state calls a young graduates to national service, the relationship is not symbolic, it's actually contractual. It's one of trust. The corps member agrees to serve the country for a year, and in return, the country accepts responsibility for the young person's welfare. That responsibility is supposed to mean several things: safe posting, clear security assessment before deployment, guidance on dangerous routes, especially in this case, rapid response when something goes wrong, and visible institutional backing so families are not left alone in moments of crisis. In this case, those protections were totally absent. Nigeria simply just watched. Which leads us back to that large question Nigerians have been whispering for many years. Is the program still serving the purpose it was created for? The idea behind the NYSC was national unity, but unity would assume a country that can, at least, guarantee the safety of the young people it sends across the lengths and breadths of the country. Today, insecurity has rewritten the Nigerian map, and there are roads even people themselves who live there would avoid at sunset, regions where travel requires a calculation, and communities where kidnapping has become an industry. Yet, the system that sends graduates across the country still operates with the logic of a safer Nigeria of 1973. And that tension is growing harder to ignore now. Why? Well, it's simple. Because when a nation cannot guarantee the safety of those it calls to serve, the question is no longer administrative. The question now becomes philosophical. What exactly are we asking these young Nigerians to sacrifice? And for what kind of a country? On that somber note, once again, I say good morning and welcome to Breakfast Extra. We've got a host of, very interesting conversations to have this morning. Only if you stay with us. Once again, good morning and welcome.